Hello everyone. Welcome to Live with OKclarity, and tonight's live experience is going to bring you clarity about attachment styles in relationships. Tonight's live stream is going to be 25 minutes long, and I'm going to stop at about the 20-minute mark to ask and see if there are any questions. So if you are on Instagram, please feel free to go ahead and put questions. And I already saw one come through into the chat, and then I may not acknowledge them immediately, but I will make sure, to acknowledge and to answer as many as I can when we get to that point. So just know, go ahead and drop them into the chat. My name is Sara Fischer Sanford, and I am a therapist. I practice in California. I specialize in working with adults with a history of trauma, and I work with a lot of adults, young adults, who are looking to form better connections with their partners. Hi. So this evening, I want to talk a little bit about attachment. And I think this is important because so many of us will enter into relationships, and if we don't understand our attachment styles and the way that affects us in relationships, then we can oftentimes have conflict in our relationships that we can either avoid or that we can try to improve just by knowing how we attach in relationships. And then, of course, to be able to have some good techniques on how to always make improvements. So attachment is one of those things that's really important because everybody has an attachment style. And that's one of those things to know. And I think that the connection for me and why I talk about attachment with my clients is that for people who have had a history of trauma, which is about 68% of adults, attachment can be affected by trauma. And so for me, that's a big connection with the population that I work with. And before I dive in, I do want to make sure that I give a little disclaimer, and that is that everything that we talk about tonight is going to be for educational and entertainment purposes only, and this is never going to be a substitute for any professional mental health, wellness, medical, or financial advice. Okay. So I was mentioning that about 68% of adults in the United States have some history of trauma. And so that's really where that connection is for me, is because being able to move past trauma, understand how attachment affects you and your partner, all of that comes together with allowing people to have healthier relationships. And I will share on a personal note that I'm celebrating a 10-year anniversary this weekend. And so knowing my attachment style and learning more about my partner's attachment style has helped us in our own relationship. So a little bit of an interesting connection there tonight. So I'm going to walk through initially having an understanding of how attachment forms, some of the main types of attachments, and then some ways that we can all do a little bit better in relationships. And just know that when we talk about attachment, that this is a very generic term. We are all human, and so we may not fall perfectly into one of these different attachment styles, but it gives us a general understanding about sort of where we are and how we communicate. So attachment is interesting. It's something that forms in our very early life, and it's easy to understand attachment styles in my mind when I think about it from the role of an infant. And that is that when we are babies, and this often occurs sometime in the first year or two of our lives, if you imagine if you're a baby and you cry, and then the parent, whoever that may be, mom, dad, or your primary caregiver, comes to you and comforts you, then you start to know if that person consistently comes and cares for you, that's going to create some security over time where you, even as an infant, know that if you cry, it's going to be okay because somebody's going to come and take care of you. And that creates a secure attachment and a secure belief and understanding that your needs can be met and they can be met consistently. Now, if we think of that as sort of perfection, we can look at a couple of the complications that can come through. And so now if we go back to imagining that infant, if that infant cries and the parent or the caregiver will only come and care for them, let's say, every couple of times, or maybe they come once and then the next time the infant cries, the caregiver doesn't come. And when you have that mix of sometimes you are cared for and sometimes you are not, even as an infant, you start to become anxious that if the next time you cry and no one is there, that can create some anxiety, some fear, and we would kind of lump that as an insecure attachment. Now, the other kind of big group of attachment styles is known as avoidant. And if we go back to thinking about that baby, and if the baby cries and nobody comes to take care of the baby or doesn't come often, then what can happen is that the baby is going to learn that the person that comes to take care of them may not be a positive experience, and they may start to avoid that attention or that connection with that caregiver. So now if we know that the perfect caregiver causes secure attachment, the sort of sporadic caregiver can cause an anxious attachment, then we know that the caregiver that takes care of that baby that's just not present can cause what we would consider an avoidant attachment. So that gives us secure, an insecure or anxious attachment style primarily, and then also knowing that there's also that avoidant attachment that really comes when there can be, let's say, neglect in an infant. So as we become adults, that piece of our life when we are infants starts to carry forward. It doesn't mean that it has to define our lives forever. It's just knowing a little bit about what that then translates into as we are adults can be really helpful. So things that happen as adults if we have a secure attachment in a relationship. And again, this is sort of like looking at perfection and knowing that we are people, so we're not going to fall completely into those categories. So a secure attachment from an adult in a relationship means that you're going to likely have a committed relationship. You can be independent in your life, but still committed and connected to your partner. You would tend to be attentive. You can be affectionate. You can be accepting of change and have the ability really to resolve conflicts in your relationship and to do it without that fear and anxiety that can come if you imagine again that infant when they are cared for consistently, they're going to have a likely consistent relationship with their partner as an adult, meaning committed, attentive, affectionate, accepting, and able to get through conflict in a positive way. So now we look forward for that anxious attachment style. And in an adult relationship, an anxious attachment would often look like not trusting your partner, can be having fear of abandonment, it can have fear of rejection. It can also be having a hard time with being comfortable with conflict or knowing how to navigate out of conflict. It can also mean that this person with an anxious attachment can be very sensitive to criticism or sensitive during arguments. It can be also that this person may be hungry for approval from their partner. And all of that sort of anxious attachment style can cause anxiety within a relationship. And that's anxiety within, is that partner going to be there? What do I do if something goes wrong in this relationship? How do I resolve the conflict and do it in a healthy way? And then also just being very sensitive and that fear of abandonment, which I think that we hear and we see about a lot with adults. Now, with an avoidant attachment, that's that infant that was not cared for consistently or often enough. That leads to, as an adult, being maybe overly rigid. It can be somebody who's very guarded and doesn't let people in or let their partner in. It can be somebody who's distant. It can lead to being uncomfortable with emotion overall because of just that lack of ability to form healthy attachments when really, really young. It can mean that when there's conflict, that this person who is avoidant would avoid conflict or could enter into a conflict and not know what to do or how to get out of it in a healthy way. People with avoidant attachment styles can also have a really hard time expressing wants and needs in a relationship just because there's a lack of understanding about how to communicate that in a healthy and safe way. And sometimes what will happen is, of course, because we're human and we don't fall perfectly into a bucket, is we get sort of this anxious avoidant mix. And so that would be people who tend toward emotional extremes, either very avoidant, very anxious, tons of fear of abandonment, and maybe then wanting to pull their partner close at the same time. And it can mean that we may have a hard time with establishing healthy boundaries in our relationships because we're a little bit all over the place in that anxious avoidant sort of category. And it can also then lead to what we consider high conflict relationships, which can mean a lot of fightings, a lot of argument, and then also not having that instinctual ability to resolve those. So if you are going to start thinking about your own attachment style, I would encourage you to do so by remembering again that we are human. We don't always fall perfectly into one of the categories, but I think a lot of us will have a primary attachment style. And it can be a really good exercise to do with your partner if you're in a relationship to figure out what attachment style you have primarily, what attachment style your partner has primarily, and then start to figure out like what sorts of things may be missing between the two of you. It can be a really good connecting conversation to try to figure out which bucket you fall into. And if you're not in a relationship, don't worry, attachment is still really important. It's something that you can address in therapy, and it can be a way to learn a lot about yourself and what to look for in a partner. And if you are dating, knowing your attachment style can also be really helpful because you will even be able to use the words, even on a date, saying, here's my attachment style. Here are my quirks, here are the things I'm working on, and then know even if there are red flags based on your own attachment, and knowing that some of those anxious or anxious avoidant pieces of personalities can come through early on. But don't despair if you are falling into one of those attachment styles that is not secure. There are definitely ways that we as adults can work on and improve our attachment style and therefore most likely have healthier relationships. So there are different ways that you can go about this. And I think the first one is what we're all doing tonight, which is to talk about attachment, understand where it comes from, and to recognize our own attachment styles. So simply having this conversation, listening to this with me tonight, you're going to start recognizing the things that are strengths for you, areas of attachment that you do really well, and knowing also what parts of attachment may be hard or may be missing. So just being educated about your attachment style is a big chunk of the way there. Another way that you can start to improve attachment as an adult is, of course, therapy. Going and talking with your therapist about what challenges you've had in current relationships, what challenges you may have had in past relationships, and even if you've had breakups or other hard pieces of relationships or struggled to get into relationships, talking with your therapist can give you some really good feedback and can help you with knowing what it is to work on within yourself and what it is to look for in a partner that would be a good combination for you. So other things that you can do to improve your attachment is, if you are in a good, healthy space, is to even act the opposite of your attachment style. So an exercise like that might be, if you're anxious and you have some fear of abandonment, it might be, okay, my partner or my boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever it may be, let's say they're going to be traveling. Maybe they're visiting family, or maybe they're going on a work trip. Then if you know that you have an anxious attachment style, you may notice when your partner is gone that you have some fear. Maybe it is anxiety and you're not sure where it's coming from. Maybe you're having fear about your partner calling or texting you back at the right time or often enough. And maybe you even have fear that your partner won't come back at all. And so if you were to push yourself in a safe way, there would be a really good moment there that you could try to work on that anxious attachment style. And that would be if you start to notice those anxious moments when your partner's not around, when you don't get the text on your phone or you don't get the call that you're hoping for, then you start to take care of yourself in those moments. And ways to take care of yourself could be ways to calm yourself. So to calm your anxiety, like you would with any kind of anxiety, with doing some deep breathing, doing some mindfulness. You can even do some distraction. Go do something that makes you feel good. Go take a walk, go exercise, go see a friend, read a book, watch Netflix, do things that are distracting. And then you can also, in those moments of anxiety, see how long it is that you can go with self-care, with coping, with calming yourself, with mindfulness or other ways. Even yoga is great for calming your body. And then when your partner comes back, or you get that text and you feel that sense of anxiety go down, you're going to go, okay, this is happening because I have an anxious attachment style. I have worked opposite of my attachment style to help bring down my anxiety. And you can imagine that even though you're not an infant, with some practice, you know that either A, you don't have to be anxious because your partner will come back, and then even if things don't go well and that text doesn't come or that relationship doesn't work, that time has not been wasted because you've spent that time learning to soothe yourself and soothe your own anxiety. And that is never a waste of time. And then if you are in another relationship ever in the future, then the next time your partner may not be responsive or may be traveling, then you're going to be already in a good headspace to know what to do. And slowly, with practice, like anything else in mental health, may not be easy the first time that you try to move past that anxious attachment. May not be easy the first time when you're dating and you don't get that text and you have that moment of anxiety. But the more that you calm yourself and the more you push yourself to a different level of attachment, into a different group of attachment styles, the more it's going to become your own default to be able to soothe your anxiety. And if you are in an avoidant group, then the other way to push yourself would be to try to form connections, to try to use communication to secure those connections, and to be able to, again, going back always, that if you have a fear of connection or you tend to avoid connection, in those moments of fear or avoidance, you always go back to taking care of yourself, because you don't have to have a partner to have secure attachments. You can learn that either as an infant, if you're lucky, you can learn that as an adult, and it's not something that will always stick It just may always be something to be mindful of. So I'm going to scroll a little bit through the questions. Thank you for putting them in there. So I think that, oh, thank you. Yes, it's definitely being saved. And I think that I'm going to give a couple more tips as I scroll through questions. Thank you. Okay. So a couple other tips that I'll give that are freebies here at the end are the ways that this can work a little bit more closely with online dating, because I know that in my practice, that can be some of the hardest part of attachment. And I'm going back to those moments, and texting and attachment styles are like where we really, really, really see it in dating. And so if you think again about how you feel when you are either waiting for that text to come, if you're deciding if you're going to send the text or reach out, you can learn a lot about your attachment in those moments. So if you're the person that may send a ton of texts to make sure that that person is going to stay interested, now you know that's an anxious attachment style. And when you start to head down that text sort of, mentality and the way that you're going through that dating relationship, now you're going to take and swerve and stop sending text after text. Instead, you're going to do taking care of yourself. If you are having those text moments when you're saying, when did this text come? Is it okay to double text? Is it okay that I, maybe holding on to the phone and not feeling very good about myself if that text doesn't come? Maybe after a first date, or even harder after a third or a fifth. You're going to go back again, recognizing, okay, this is me. This is my attachment style. Is the person on the other end maybe a little avoidant? That's possible. That's one possibility, and you can explore that. You can also think to yourself, is this a moment of my own anxiety? And if so, take care of that. Take care of yourself. And then again, if those texts don't come, then maybe that's a sign that that person's attachment style doesn't mesh well with yours. Doesn't mean you have to dump them. Doesn't mean that you can't try to date them. There are so many more things about us than just attachment styles, of course. But it's one of those things to have a conversation, so that way you know that going forward, when you're looking at dating or with that person or that attachment style, that you think about that. If that text doesn't come, you think about that if they're not a good communicator. And if you can say, it's okay to be honest and say, hey, I'm a little bit anxious in my attachment style. It's really helpful to me if I was to get a text from you once a day just to say hello. That's okay. Asking for what you need is a big piece of this as well. It will always be a balance of soothing your own anxiety, asking for what you need from your partner to help. There's no reason to suffer. And then also to know that if you are dating and communication is poor, doesn't mean run. It just means recognizing, is this me? Is this my partner? And if you care and you want to work on that relationship, doing so from a place of understanding and being educated about your own attachment, about their attachment, then you're going to have everything you need to put it together into what is hopefully a very healthy and communicative relationship. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. I hope that this has provided you with some clarity. If you would like to learn more about me, you can do so on OKclarity.com. And just want to thank everyone for joining, and to everyone that watches this on the replay. And if you're in a relationship, try to see what you can do to communicate about attachment. And if you are thinking about dating or you're online dating, I hope that this clarity this evening brings you to a place of a little bit more understanding. So thanks again. I appreciate the time and the questions, and I hope everybody has a wonderful week to come. Thanks. Good night.